The day the heat really started to kick in was one of those slow burn mornings where you're just kind of counting the seconds until relief. My neighbors and I, we had this community center, a small building that doubled as a cooling center whenever the city hit those uncomfortable heat waves. Usually, it was a godsend. Air conditioning, a few fans, a couple of old folks lounging in their chairs. Nothing fancy, but it worked. And it was the only place that made sense to be when the temperature hit 105 degrees Fahrenheit. But that morning, when I walked through the door, it hit me. The heat was suffocating. You know how sometimes you open the door, and it's not just warm, it's like walking into a furnace? Yeah, that was the vibe. I had just come from my air-conditioned truck, so I was still holding on to the idea that this might be an isolated pocket of hot air. But no, not today. The cooling center was a sauna, a human furnace. And then I saw it. Old man Lewis, poor guy, slumped over in his chair, looking like he was melting. There was Lily, the little girl from next door, standing by her grandma fanning her with a piece of cardboard. And Mrs. Harrison, who was sitting at the back, looking like she could barely breathe. But it was Mrs. Dunham that really caught my attention. She was hunched over, hand to her chest, gasping for air. She had asthma. I've known her for years, and she's always been the one handing out cookies at HOA meetings. Always the warm, smiling lady. Seeing her like this, that flipped a switch in my head. I looked around, trying to find the air conditioning, only to realize it wasn't on. I swear, the sweat was already trickling down my back. I rushed to the window to see who was around. And then, as if on cue, here comes Brenda. Brenda, the HOA president. You know the type. She walks around like she owns the place, always meticulously made up, always carrying that "I'm in charge here" look. And there she was, standing outside with that same smug little smile on her face. I could feel the anger bubbling up in me, but I kept it together. For now. I asked, "Where's the AC?" trying to keep it cool. She glanced at me, unbothered, and said, "Oh, it was unplugged. You know, for safety reasons. The filter was a fire hazard. We couldn't have that, could we?" She said this like it was no big deal, as if a few hot, struggling people didn't matter. The words "fire hazard" hung in the air like they were the reason we were all standing there, sweating bullets. I was losing it at that point. This wasn't just a dumb HOA rule. This was life and death for some people in there. Mrs. Dunham could barely catch her breath, and Brenda was standing there acting like she just watered her flowers. My blood was boiling. I wanted to shout, but instead, I took a breath and said, "You just unplugged it? In the middle of a heat wave?" She gave me this look, like I was the one being unreasonable. I was just following the bylaws. Unauthorized use of the utility. You know the rules. She didn't even seem to care that there were people in there gasping for air. The look she gave me was pure condescension. That's when it hit me. I had had enough. I knew I couldn't just plug the AC back in. This woman, she had no boundaries. So I did what anyone in my position would do. I decided to make a statement, an epic one. I pulled out my phone and called Sully. You see, Sully runs an event logistics company. He's the guy you call when you need serious equipment for a big event. He's got everything from lights to heavy machinery. He also happens to be a man of action, not words. I told him, I need Big Bertha. Big Bertha is what Sully calls his 40-foot refrigerated trailer. She's a monster. She's got dual-zone climate control, her own diesel generator, and, most importantly, she can cool down an entire warehouse. The trailer's not pretty. It's seen better days, but for what I was planning, perfect. Sully laughed when I told him what was going down. He didn't hesitate. He told me he'd have a driver roll up in a couple of hours, and I grinned like a madman. This was going to be good. About 2 hours later, I was pacing in front of the clubhouse, trying to look casual, but my heart was racing. I knew what was coming, but it didn't make it any less thrilling. And then I heard it. The deep rumble of an engine, followed by the unmistakable blast of an air horn. Big Bertha was here. The trailer turned the corner like a freight train, dwarfing the quiet suburban street. The hum of the engine, the squeak of the wheels, and the sound of the air horn were all part of this glorious entrance. I knew it was going to be good, but I didn't realize just how sweet it would feel until I saw Brenda's face when she looked out the window. She looked like she'd just swallowed a live wasp. Her hands went up in the air. "What is this? What is this monstrosity?" she screeched, walking out onto her driveway. I turned slowly, feeling every bit the king of my suburban castle, and said, "This, Brenda, is Big Bertha. She's providing temporary climate control for the cooling center since the AC was shut off due to a certain HOA president's enforcement of unauthorized utility use." I don't think she heard a word after that. Her face was redder than a fire truck. She sputtered about bylaws, neighborhood aesthetics, and how this was an eyesore. "You can't do this," she cried. "This is a commercial vehicle on a residential street." I couldn't help but smile. "Actually, Brenda," I said, "it's perfectly legal. It's on public property. And the noise? Well, I believe it's well within acceptable decibel levels as per Town Ordinance 34B. Probably quieter than your leaf blower at 7 a.m. on a Saturday." The neighbors who'd gathered to watch this circus couldn't help but chuckle, and I felt like I had the world in the palm of my hand. Brenda was losing it, but I didn't care. She was on a power trip, and I was about to knock her down a few pegs. She called the police, of course, and when the officers arrived, they didn't know what to make of the whole situation. Officer Miller, the older one, took one look at Big Bertha and said, "Is this your trailer?" I nodded. "It's a rental. From a licensed local business, Sully's Cool Solutions. It's legally parked, and it's providing much-needed climate control for the cooling center. You know, for the elderly and kids. It's a public health emergency." Officer Miller rubbed his temples, clearly over this whole HOA drama, while Officer DeVoye stood there, trying not to laugh. "Ma'am," Miller said to Brenda, "you may have a point about the aesthetics, but this seems more like an HOA issue than anything criminal." Brenda's face turned every shade of red, and I could hear her blood pressure rising from across the street. She tried to call the mayor, the HOA board, and probably even a few lawyers, but the officers made it clear there was nothing they could do. Big Bertha was staying. That was the turning point. Brenda stormed off to make her calls, but she was defeated. And the best part? The cooling center, for the first time in hours, was finally cool. Mrs. Dunham, looking better than she had in hours, smiled at me and whispered, "You're a good boy, Mark." And honestly, that made the whole thing worth it. For the next 3 days, Big Bertha stayed parked right there, cooling the clubhouse like a champ. People were comfortable. Brenda, on the other hand, was pacing her porch, dialing numbers and sending out a furious HOA newsletter about atmospheric terrorism and unauthorized heavy machinery. It was ridiculous. And of course, nobody cared. The story spread. By the time Sully picked up Big Bertha, the whole neighborhood was talking about the big chill of 2025, and Brenda's power trip had finally been put in its place. So, did I overdo it? Maybe. But sometimes you've got to take matters into your own hands, especially when bureaucracy and petty rules get in the way of people's health. What do you think? Was I right to fight back against her tyrannical little kingdom? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear what you think about rules, power, and the lengths we go to when someone crosses the line. Thanks for watching.